I'm Dee Aker. I'm the director here at the Institute for Peace and Justice. And this is our fourth and, alas, our last of our 2015 Women Peacemaker Program conversations. Each year, our women peacemakers bring us their lives, their work, their perspectives on what has to be transformed or changed or understood to bring us to greater peace in our communities and our lives. In 2003, the very first year we had the Women Peacemakers Program, we had an Israeli by the name of Dalit Baum here, and she ended her conversation with us by saying that we must learn to make peace first around ourselves before we run off and try and do it someplace else in the world. And I think it's very true. However, in my years in this work, and particularly in peace building, and working with women peacemakers, I think it also means understanding and listening and supporting those building peace around themselves anywhere in the world so that we can learn how to make peace around ourselves wherever we are. There's no magic potion, there's no prescription, no foolproof guaranteed steps to build peace. There's patience and trust and paying attention to who gets caught in the web of history and mistrust. There's risk in talking and creating environments where people can see themselves in an atmosphere where peace is possible. Peace building is not a checklist. Our peacemakers are teaching that to us again and again. In just a moment, you're going to meet Galia Golan from Israel, who'll bring us up to date on the peace movement under fire in Israel and the apparent challenges to and standing of the two-state solution today. This issue, and having Galia here, is a special time for the IPJ and for me personally. While our paths did not knowingly cross at the time, Galia and I shared an experience almost 50 years ago now. She was a young American who went to Israel not long before the '67 war. I was an American who went shortly thereafter. We, coming from very different backgrounds religiously, have compared notes. We both believed that there was hope and options then at the time. So I look forward to this update. Jen Freeman, our Senior Program Officer for Women, Peace, and Security, will introduce and facilitate the discussion with you and Galia. First, please join me in thanking all of our 2015 peacemakers and residents who continually work for peace in their communities. Judge Nadia Ayuba from Afghanistan. Where did she go? Pauline Dempers from Namibia. Pauline. Glenda Vilshut, I'm not even try with the last part, from South Africa, and of course Galia. Documenting the lives of women who speak up and collaborate and who risk much to build their communities in the face or aftermath of conflict is the purpose of the Women Peacemakers Program. So please also welcome our 2015 documentarians, our peace writers who are capturing the hopes and fears and efforts and successes by which our heroines engage in the challenges around them. Jenna Bartlett, Gabrielle Clifford, Claire Doran, and Maggie Thatch. And we thank you all for coming. I hope that we'll also see you tomorrow night when we celebrate UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And our peacemakers will all be making a statement about where that stands in their countries. For those of you who don't know, you got to come and find out now. But I don't want to take up any more of our time. May I introduce Galia? And Galia's going to go first. Okay, thanks.
Hello, Tzoraim Tovim, Shalom, everybody. Okay, let's see what we have here. Ah, yes. There we are, this little tiny country, and a very complex conflict, which I'm not going to try to explain in any detail unless you have a couple months free. It is complicated, and actually this cartoon is terrific because it really shows so many different aspects with a bit of humor, but it's all, almost everything in there is accurate. I think in trying to explain where we are today, I think a little bit of the past is important to know. Certainly, when the State of Israel was created in 1948 by the United Nations, we entered a period where I think there really was little to no chance for resolution of the conflict. It was very much an all or nothing, or what in international relations we call a zero-sum situation. Palestinians, for the most part, had been driven out or felt that they were driven out. Very few remained in the area that became Israel, but the Arab state that was supposed to have been created in the other part of the mandate of Palestine was not created. War ensued, of course, refugees. The Palestinian attitude was pretty much that we were colonialists, come mainly from Europe, and created a colonialist state. For us, we saw ourselves and still see ourselves as a national movement, and we see the conflict quite differently, not as one of anti-colonialism versus colonialists, but one of two national liberation movements struggling for control over the same piece of land. And that really was the situation, this struggle over control of the same piece of land throughout the 1950s and the early 60s. I think things changed in a sense. We got an opportunity with the 1967 war. And Dee referred to it, and it was very much the atmosphere at the time, that this war, which led to the acquisition of the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and other territories as a result of that war, had nonetheless created or opened up something of an opportunity. I mean, on the one hand, it was a disaster in the sense that we became occupiers over 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and also in East Jerusalem. But at the same time, it gave us something that we could bargain over, a bargaining chip. And the feeling was at the time that we were going to be able to exchange land for peace. And now the Arabs would make peace with us, the Arab states, in order to get their territory back. That was the feeling at the time. I'm not saying that everybody was convinced that that was going to happen, or everybody was convinced that it was necessarily a good thing, but certainly the feeling at the time, and for most of us, I think the very good feeling, that now there was a chance for peace. And in fact, that actually did occur with Egypt when Israel was willing to give back the Sinai Peninsula, unfortunately after a very terrible war, the Yom Kippur War. We did make peace with Egypt. And that was, in a sense, the opportunity we had gained once we had that territory and returned it. But the core of the problem remained. And the core issue, from the beginning, and certainly to this day, the core issue is between us, Israel, and the Palestinians. And here the big breakthrough came only in 1988, when the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, decided for their own reasons, mainly pragmatic reasons, that they couldn't or wouldn't destroy the state of Israel. And they agreed to pass a resolution to recognize Israel's right to exist within secure and recognized borders, and to go for what's called the two-state solution. That is, build a Palestinian state, or try to build a Palestinian state, only in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, instead of trying to have a Palestinian state in all of what had been historic Palestine. In other words, a very serious compromise to go for a state next to, not instead of, the state of Israel. And this is what led ultimately to the 1993 Oslo Accords, when Israel and Israeli leaders decided that the occupation was not a positive factor for us, it wasn't bringing us security, and that we had to find a way to reach an agreement with the Palestinians. The Oslo Accords were not a peace agreement. They were an interim agreement during which time, it was supposed to be a 5-year period, Israel would begin to withdraw from the occupied territories, and negotiations would begin over what the final status would be, where the borders would be, what the status of Jerusalem would be, and so on and so forth, all of the major issues. But the real breakthrough of the Oslo Accords was the mutual recognition, mutual recognition between Palestinians and Israelis. What happened after that was negotiations, terror attacks mainly by Hamas, the Islamists, the assassination, and we're marking that, as a matter of fact, just in these days, the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin by a Jewish law student, a religious Jewish law student. And then more negotiations, more failure, the second intifada, more failed negotiations, wars, attacks, rockets, extremism growing on both sides, and unfortunately also the elections of increasingly right-wing governments in Israel. And that's what brings us to today. And so once again, I'm tempted to say, surprise, surprise, this month, just this month, almost every day this month, we've seen scenes like this in Ramallah, in the West Bank, another place just outside Jerusalem in the West Bank. This, by the way, is my town. It's called Ra'anana. It's a suburb of Tel Aviv, sort of middle class, upscale. This is our main street. We only have one main street. It's a very small town. This building is where my doctor's offices are. I was there just before I came here. This was the scene of a terrorist attack last week on the main street. This is, what I want to show you is something that we see every day. Or actually, I probably should correct that, so that we, meaning Israelis, don't see it every day. Things that have gone on and go on every day in the occupied territories, but only Palestinians are getting killed. When it creeps into Israel, that's when we wake up. And the reason I wanted to show you this picture is that it's been a while since the conflict has come so directly into Israel. And that's what's been going on the past month. Stabbings in Tel Aviv, in Ra'anana, where I live, certainly in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was always more prone to these things because it's a divided city and very easy for Palestinians to get in, cross over. But they've been all over the place, in the north, in a small town in the north. But that's what's been particularly distressing. This may be what we call an intifada, maybe the third intifada. Nobody's sure about that just yet. It depends to a large degree on how long it goes on and how widespread it gets. But basically what it is, I think, is desperation. What's going on now is not planned, it's not organized, and it's not organized by the Palestinian Authority. It seems to be young people, young Palestinians, just acting more or less spontaneously, basically taking a knife from the kitchen or a little screwdriver and just going out and trying to attack an Israeli, usually a soldier, not only. That's what it seems to be. So this is after the attack in Ra'anana. I have other pictures, but I decided not to show them, that are a little bit before the cleaning up. This was later in the day, same street, residential area, a little closer to where I live. And there they actually caught, I guess it's a security camera, maybe a radar type thing, I don't know. But you can actually see the stabbing. This is the Jerusalem bus station, the central station in Jerusalem after an attack. This is a different attack. It was on a bus. And as a matter of fact, one of the people who had been wounded died this morning. At least it was in this morning's newspaper. This was a shooting and a stabbing on the bus. This is the aftermath of it. But there's another side to this, and that's the other side of it. This is also apparently a suspect on the ground that you can't see. And these are, today, all of these are just from the past two weeks, 3 weeks. And there's a lot worse. I went over many, many pictures and discarded many, many pictures. There are a lot worse. But we do believe that there is another way. And this is a demonstration that was held Saturday before last Saturday, Saturday night, in Jerusalem. It was a demonstration held by the organization I'm involved with, Combatants for Peace, which is an organization of ex-fighters, people from the Israeli army and Palestinians who've sat in Israeli jails for terrorist acts or for violent acts, whether it's throwing stones or throwing Molotov cocktails or worse. And this is a movement where they've gotten together to say that there is another way. And that's what we firmly believe, that this is the only way to go, and that's Palestinians and Israelis together. And we'll talk a little bit more about the peace movement as we go along.
Thank you so much, Galia, for sharing both a little bit about a history that I feel like so many of us hear secondhand, thirdhand via media reports, but a quick summary both from the background and of course what's been going on over the last month and a couple weeks in particular is very helpful. It also paints a disturbingly depressing picture, as you all know. And I wanted to ask, you're saying there's another way. Can you tell us about a time when there has been hope that gives us reason to believe that there could be the kind of environment where this could
Well,
live?
if you click, I have another picture. That's a picture of a Peace Now demonstration, an organization that I helped found and build a massive demonstration. We used to have lots of these. And this was a demonstration in support of the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords, as I said, were not a peace accord, and there are a lot of criticism of it because it didn't talk about what would happen at the end, that there would be a Palestinian state and so forth. But as I mentioned, the Oslo Accords were a breakthrough, a tremendous breakthrough. And there was tremendous support for it. 65% of Israelis, about 65% of Palestinians. And one of the things that I remember, really a good thing in terms of this whole long period, is that is the signing of the Accords on the White House lawn. We watched this on an enormous screen in a hotel in East Jerusalem, Palestinian part of Jerusalem. A group of Israelis who'd been in the peace movement, Palestinians who'd been active with us, quite a large crowd, and we watched the signing. And when Rabin and Arafat shook hands, to say that there were tears, it would be an understatement. It was extraordinary, and we had champagne. It was fantastic. And the feeling was that after all of these years, and really a lot of bloodshed on both sides, we were going to get there. And it was a terrific feeling. This was definitely a period of hope. And while I showed you the pictures of what's going on right now, there are still things that do really make me hopeful. I think two things that I want to mention. One is that I have a friend who is a sociologist in Ramallah, Palestinian by the name of Khalil Shikaki. And every year, usually twice a year, he does surveys. He runs has an institute that does surveys. And he works with a colleague of mine, Yaakov Shamir, and more recently, Ifat Maoz, at the Hebrew University. And what they do is they track public opinion. And Khalil interviews something like 1,500, 1,200 Palestinians in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. And the Israelis are interviewed by Yaakov, Israeli Jews. And among other things, what does give me a tremendous amount of hope, and I mention it often when I'm speaking, because what they do, amongst other things, is that each of them will ask basically the same questions. And they'll put up there the issue of Jerusalem and a possible compromise solution on the issue of Jerusalem. The Palestinians invariably say, no way, no compromise. And the Jews invariably say, no way, no compromise. And they do the same thing for the refugee issue, the border issue, security. Each issue separately, no compromise possible. But then And this is consistent throughout the 1990s and as recently as last January. They give the whole package. The package is basically something we call the Clinton parameters. It outlines a solution very clearly, just what would happen, where the borders would be, land swaps, international control of the holy places in Jerusalem, a very clear solution. They give the package with each specific issue exactly the way it was separately, and the package is accepted by the Jews, by the Palestinians. The very same things on which they said separately, no compromise. Which suggests to me, and this is consistent, and this suggests to me that if the government of Israel and if the leadership of the PLO, the Palestinians, bring a package, this package, to the public, the people believe, the Palestinians believe that there will be an end of the occupation and the creation of an independent state. And Israelis believe that there'll be an end of the conflict and peace. It will be accepted. Both publics are ready for it. Both publics, in my opinion, want it. Both publics support the two-state solution. Our problem is that because of the failures, both publics are convinced that there's no partner on the other side. Israel continues to build settlements. It means clearly we're not planning to leave the occupied territories if we're settling it. And on the Palestinian side, we find more and more extremists coming up, also more and more terrorism as in the past days. Clearly, they're not willing to accept us. And it's basically that we have to tackle, this idea that there's no partner, this loss of hope, which is why the joint organization working together with Palestinians is so important, to show there is another way, there are partners. And the second thing, if we go to the next one, the second thing that gives me hope is, first of all, between the demonstration I showed you from the Saturday night before and this past Saturday night, there were more killings every day. And so Saturday night, we had another demonstration, this one in Tel Aviv. Again, protesting the use of violence. And at that demonstration, this fellow down here in the corner was one of the founders of Combatants for Peace. He was an officer in a combat unit, and he was actually one of the founders of the organization. He read out a letter. Normally it'd be a nice piece of paper, but the way they do it now, it's from his iPhone. And the letter, before you start reading, they sent me the letter, an email before the demonstration, and I start reading this thing, and it's a litany of, let's go back, because I don't want to get in the way. There we go.
I can't be trusted not to read it when you ask them not.
The letter was a litany of the terrible things that have been happening to the Palestinians just in the past month, 6 weeks. Killings, the burning of a family, just horrible things, a whole litany, and a scathing criticism of Netanyahu. And I thought, oh, this is what he's going to say, is that we can't do this anymore. We can't work together anymore. And I was very concerned because they were going to read this letter, or at least the suggestion was they were going to read this at the demonstration. But then I got to the bottom of it. It was written, by the way, in Hebrew. And this was the rest of the letter. We are your brothers. We know that our path together is a difficult path, but despite that, this is the only path that will lead us to a just peace based on the creation of a Palestinian state next to the state of Israel, living in good neighborliness and mutual respect. We understand your fears. We too are afraid. Continuation of the occupation is the central factor behind the bloodshed, and it is our obligation, the obligation of all of us, to work towards an end of the occupation and the building of peace, devoid of killing, and instead of walls, bridges of peace and love. Jamil Kassas, he lives in the refugee camp Dheisheh, which is just south of Jerusalem in the West Bank, and he wrote this in the name of the Palestinians in Combatants for Peace. And this was read at the demonstration. And that's what gives me hope.
That's fairly significant. And I think from what we hear of the political rhetoric, we don't often get exposed to voices like these. what role do you think the leadership has to play in finding that partner or being that partner? And how can you get there to having those leaders in place?
Well, that's a central question. And that's what we keep working on in the peace movement. And we've tried any number of things, demonstrations, petitions, gimmicks. I think there are two things that may help, in addition to what we try to do in civil society. The one is the international community. I think we know that in the past the international community has helped. We're also at a point, I think, where we're very concerned that we can't do this on our own. We've certainly failed enough in the past. I think the international community can help. I think a new resolution at the United Nations Security Council might help, outlining a peace plan, the peace plan that we know is out there and can be done. And in order for that to happen, the United States has to stop trying to block it, because there is a resolution been proposed. Things of this nature. And the other thing is, as I said earlier, I think joint activity. I really have come to the conclusion that we have to act inside together with Palestinians to try to overcome this belief that's so strong on both sides that the other side is totally unwilling to compromise, totally unaccepting. And I think these two things may make the difference, because what we have to do, obviously, is to bring about a change in our own leadership. And that's where I think the pressure from below, which will only come if people can be brought to believe that there is a possibility, that we can work with the Palestinians, and I think outside pressure.
Thank you. I want to give sufficient time for all of you to also ask Galia your questions. But before I hand it over, I just wanted to ask a couple questions about you and your role in this, because as an academic, as a prolific speaker on Israeli-Arab relations, the political situation in the region, that can all be very academic and up here and policy focused. And I wanted to come back, and please tell me if I get this story wrong, but you have been there for some of the seminal moments and faced a considerable amount of risk yourself in this quest for peace. You were on stage, if I remember correctly, when Rabin was assassinated at a Peace Now demonstration, and you yourself have been attacked for your work. Can you share that story?
I don't want to exaggerate the risk.
Okay.
There's been harassment of people in the movement, and by harassment I mean painting a slogan on the side of the wall of someone's home. Actually, there was a little bomb placed outside the house of one person, a colleague. But we never really thought we were at risk. We never thought we were at risk. We never even considered it. But the time of the First Lebanon War, 1982, and I guess I have to explain this a little bit. One of the major dilemmas that we have in the peace movement is demonstrating a time of war, because the army in Israel is us. It's us, husband, brother, whatever, sons, fathers, and because everybody at the age of 18, almost everybody goes. And so to protest a war while it's happening, when the people up there fighting, I mean, you know them. This happened in 1982 with the First Lebanon War. It hadn't happened before that. There were protests after the wars. Oh, that happened a lot, but not during a war. When the 1982 war broke out, Israel invaded Lebanon in order to try to push the PLO out of southern Lebanon, where they had put themselves in and built something of a state within a state, and they were arming and they were shelling and so forth, shelling Israel. And Israel invaded, and it was billed as a limited operation to push them back basically the range of their artillery, 45 kilometers. And so the war broke out, and we immediately went to the office of Peace Now and tried to decide what to do. And we didn't demonstrate. And we waited 10 days. Another little group, a little peace group, a little more radical than us, they did demonstrate. They didn't have many people because they were a small radical group. And then after 10 days, as Israel continued into Lebanon, nearing Beirut, we demonstrated. And we were interviewed afterwards. You know, what was going on? And we explained how difficult it was to demonstrate while our own people are fighting and maybe getting killed, even though we opposed the war. And that war was a very unpopular war because it was perceived by the public, by all of us, as not a war of choice. Our other wars, they weren't necessarily forced on us, but in the general thinking, our other wars had been forced on us, and this was a war of choice. And there was tremendous opposition. So this was a very big dilemma. But the reason I connected is that we demonstrated all summer against this war. And we had massive demonstrations against the war, massive demonstrations, the largest ever held in Israel, because it really was a very unpopular war. And this atmosphere got worse and worse. And our biggest demonstration was 400,000 people, they say, that we organized at a time when there was a massacre in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. The massacre was carried out by the Christian phalangists, the Christian leadership, and the Christian army of Lebanon. But we were sitting in Beirut at the time, our army. And the demonstration was to find out, to demand that there be an official commission of inquiry. What was our role? What was Israel's role in that massacre? Because Israel had a role protecting the Christian army, providing the lighting, and so forth. So the commission was created, and the results came in several months later in February 1983. And so, and the commission said that the person who had been defense minister had to resign. And we held a march in Jerusalem calling for his resignation, implement the findings of the commission. And we marched, the march went up to the government offices, and we demonstrated there. And as the demonstrators were dispersing, a hand grenade was thrown on us. And one of our people was killed, another 7 were injured. I took the injured to the hospital in my car. And that's when we realized that maybe it wasn't so, quote, risk-free or so easy in a sense. And very often in Israeli press, in any case, the hand grenade on the Peace Now demonstration, the killing of Emil Grenzweig, was a master's student, kibbutz member. There's a direct line between that and the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. The incitement that preceded the hand grenade was very similar to the incitement that preceded the assassination. It was incitement against Rabin over the Oslo Accords and the build-up, and then the shooting of Rabin at the end of that demonstration. And they're connected. But Israel has become a very violent society, where it hadn't been before, and we feel that the occupation has something to do with it. Because everybody goes, as I said. Your 18-year-old kids are out there. And you can't have a system where you're ignoring the rule of law. You're ignoring the rule of law. And you shoot at will and then come back home inside Israel and law-abiding, peaceful. It has to have an effect, and we feel it has had an effect.
Thank you. We have two mics, and I already see 3 questions, 4, 5. Miranda has a mic. We are recording the session, so please do state your name when you ask the question. Miranda?
Yeah, hello, good afternoon. My name is Agatha Chikelu, and I'm a graduate student from Kroc School of Peace Studies. And my question is this, from all you've said, you've just given us a good background of what is happening in Israel. So my question, and I don't know whether to call it fear, is that I would want you to tell us more, of what you think about the future of Israel, especially the youth. How do you see the future? How do you see the Israeli youth, interacting with Palestinian youth tomorrow? How do you envision the environment of Israel, let's say, in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to take a few questions at once?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take, Miranda, let's take a couple questions, and then, so
Writing
there's
them
one
down.
more.
My name is Ellen Souter, and I visited Israel in 2013, and so I understand it is a small country and in a dangerous area. And I went into the West Bank area, and there were settlements. And this group you belong to talks about ending the occupation. Are the settlements still going? And when you talk about ending the occupation, does that mean ending the settlements or keeping those that are already there?
Good.
Okay. Another one? I know we've got ones on this side too. Oh, sorry.
My name is Glenn Middleton from Hands of Peace San Diego. We bring Israeli youth, 16 and 17-year-olds, Palestinian youth, 16 and 17-year-olds, and American youth, 16 and 17-year-olds, together here in San Diego and Chicago, Illinois, to have dialogue for 3 weeks in the summer. We hosted a 17-year-old boy from Israel this year, Jonathan Moroz, and he lives just north of Tel Aviv. He's back there now, and we Skype with him every Saturday. He's part of our family now. My question is, do you believe that the current Israeli government and the Palestinian leadership are stuck in a cycle of ensuring that they will stay in power by the continuation of perpetual conflict? Thank you.
Okay, those are 3 big questions. We'll take a break, have a chance for Galia to respond, and then take some more. You know we have to leave at 1:45.
Let me take that one first. First of all, let me just say one thing. I don't know Hands of Peace, but what you're doing is probably the most important thing that can be done, really. Bringing young people, Israelis and Palestinians, together is tremendous. I know Seeds of Peace does it. That's the organization I'm more familiar with. It's extraordinarily important. We had a youth movement attached to our peace movement. We had to disband it. We ran out of money. But I think it's extraordinarily important. And to catch them 16 to 18. At 18, the kids go into the army. And on the Palestinian side, it's 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds who were doing some of these stabbings. It's really important. That said, expand it and bring the same kids again because it needs reinforcement, or make sure it's being done, that they meet when they come back.
Yes, we have an alumni program.
It's tremendous. It's so important. So thank you. It's really terrific. Yeah, staying in power. I think that's, I don't believe that's true. First of all, Abu Mazen is trying to get out of power. He's 79 years old, maybe he's already 80. And he's been trying to resign. He's also sort of thwarted a lot of the people who might have replaced him. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But what would happen if he came, when he leaves, we won't be quite as fortunate, because he's probably the most moderate Palestinian leader that we've had. He's the one who's been really strong about nonviolence and trying to prevent another intifada, and has been reaching out to the Israeli public, to civil society, to politicians. So I didn't believe that Arafat wanted to continue the conflict, and I don't believe that Abu Mazen does. But Abu Mazen is so clear. Netanyahu, I don't think it's a question of continuing the conflict in order to stay in power. There's no question in my mind that Netanyahu's main purpose in life is to stay in power. Okay. But I don't think that's the reason for his position on the conflict. I think his reason for his position on the conflict is that he is convinced that the Palestinians are basically no different from the Nazis, and that they want to drive us into the sea, and that they cannot be trusted, and that peace is impossible. And as he said, it was in the paper yesterday, we just have to live by the sword. That's something a lot of leaders in Israel, almost all the leaders of Israel in the past, almost all, have believed. And I think that's where he is. I think he's ideological. I don't think he's a pragmatist. I don't think it's just because he wants to stay in power. That's part of it. He wants to stay in power. But I think that he really believes that there's no difference between the Palestinians, the Iranians, and the Nazis. Okay. Settlements. Settlements are who asked a question about settlements? Yes. Settlements are really a major obstacle. And I think, by the way, that they're the obstacle, aside from a leadership decision. But once we have the political will at the top, and they sit down, we know what the agreement's going to look like, as I said, pretty much. I think the real issue is going to be, what do you do with 500,000 settlers? About 350,000 settlers in the West Bank, and then another 200,000 or more in East Jerusalem. In most of the peace agreements that have been negotiated, or at least the issues and so forth, it seems Abu Mazen seems to have been willing to let the settlers in East Jerusalem stay. These were the Clinton parameters that said that the Jewish neighborhoods will be under Israeli sovereignty, the Arab neighborhoods under Palestinian, and the Jewish neighborhoods are in fact settlements in East Jerusalem. And I think that Abu Mazen indicated in the last set of set before the last set of negotiations that those could stay. Almost all of them. One of them he contested. So the issue really is, what do you do about the 350,000 settlers in the West Bank? And in the various peace agreements that have been worked on, there is the idea of, there are two areas which are sort of blocks of settlements where about 80% of the settlers live. These are right near the Israeli border, the old border, the Green Line. And so there's talk of, in the negotiations, there's talk of swaps of territory, so that Israel could annex these two blocks, and the Palestinian state would get an area just south of Jerusalem that was good land and not inhabited, and compensation. That said, 80%, that's great, but then there's the other 20%, and they're settlers who live in more far-flung areas, and they tend also to be the more radical, the more extreme. And that's going to be the issue. How do we get them out? We have been in a number of peace movements. We have long called for something called pinui pitsui, which is offer compensation now to settlers who want to leave. Because the majority of the settlers went there for what's called quality of life. They went there because there were economic incentives to go and settle. The ideological settlers, those who say, God gave us this land and that's why we're here, they're a minority. So most settlers could be compensated and accommodated. But we've got these extremists in these far-flung places. And that's the challenge. And there's some students here, that's going to be the challenge we're going to talk about on Thursday. That, in my opinion, I don't think the refugee issue is impossible to resolve. I think they've come very close to it. Jerusalem, there's a settlement that's been more or less worked out. Security has definitely been worked out on paper. Settlements, how are we going to get the settlers out? Because some of them will fight. They will fight. All right, the question I was avoiding. The future. Assuming we have a future, I can say this. Civil society in Israel is extremely active and vibrant. It's the best thing in Israel. And it's young people. It's just fantastic. Now, what percentage of those young people are in the peace movement and what percentage are supporting the settlers? I have no idea. I really have no idea. The polls are not good. The polls tend to show that the young people are more right-wing than left-wing. And right-wing and left-wing in Israel is purely dove and hawk on the peace issue. There's no other meaning really for left and right in Israel since the Six-Day War in 1967. I would say generally, the young people are not particularly interested in this conflict. They want jobs. They want to be able to afford housing. They want to be able to afford cost of living. They want smaller classrooms for their young kids. These are the issues. Plus, of course, environment and animal rights and a few other things. And they want to be able to live a life that doesn't have them going off to war every other year or rockets falling every summer. And they don't seem to be terribly interested in any other aspect of it. The peace movement is the motor of the peace movement are young people, but this is a minority of the young people. I think people generally, including the young people, are finished with the conflict. They don't want to hear about it. They're not particularly hopeful. The word peace has sort of lost its meaning. And it doesn't mean that they support the present government, but they just sort of shut it out. And we had massive, massive marches and demonstrations in the summer of 2011. Right after the Arab Spring, we had the Israeli summer every week. Masses of people, and mainly young people. But there wasn't a word of the conflict or peace or Palestinians or settlements. It was all in the cost of living. It was all in the cost of living. And part of the reason for that is that they really don't believe that there's a partner on the other side or that there's a solution possible.
Any idea on how to reignite them?
any idea of how to reunite them. Well, if you have any ideas, I'm open.
I think that was an open call. That certainly wasn't just for me.
Yeah, it isn't the young people, it's the population altogether. And I'll tell you another thing. I mean, my first reaction, which I didn't want to say, my first reaction, well, we've got stabbings, we've got terrorism, and we have some rockets falling on us. That might get people to remember that there's a conflict again. And last summer, when rockets were falling on us, and we protested, I didn't think twice, by the way, last summer's protest. I thought cynically almost, well, now maybe people remember there's a conflict and rockets are falling all over Israel. Now they've got long-range rockets, whether it's from the north or from the south, they hit everywhere. I thought maybe now people will remember that there's a conflict and that there's an occupation, and they did. And what you did hear, and hear a lot now, is people saying, yeah, we know, and this summer we were expecting another war, and oh yeah, well, if not this summer, it'll be next summer, but there'll be this rockets. Everybody knows that it's going to go on and on. The only thing is that the conclusions that people draw from that are different. My conclusion is we've got to reach a peace agreement. That's the only way to stop this cycle of violence. But that's not the way that's not the same conclusion that others reach. And many people reach the conclusion, we just got to go in and finish them. And so there was criticism after the last war from the right. There's criticism right now. Why doesn't the government just go in and destroy this or destroy that? So I don't know what will wake people up. Part of the problem is that when I hear of a terrorist attack, or even if I'm involved, my first reaction is, this is more evidence, if you want to use that word, of the need to reach a peace agreement, to end the occupation, because I connect the violence with the occupation. What the government has been doing recently is, and the right wing will often say, it has nothing to do with the occupation, they hate Jews. And so a terrorist attack, and Netanyahu said it the other day, is an attack on the Jewish people, he said. It's not. Now, they may hate Jews. I mean, they may hate us, but I mean, living as they do under occupation. But the occupation is the issue, and the resistance is to the occupation. It doesn't mean in their heart of hearts they love us, but they have, as a majority, and their leadership, come to the realization or the conclusion that they can't destroy us, they're not going to push us out, and that they have to live side by side. And they've accepted that. And what they demand and what they need is the end of the occupation. And I must say that in the argument, a perfectly legitimate argument, it comes from the right wing. And they say, yeah, but you'll end the occupation and they'll still fight. And my only answer to that is, and I accept that as a very genuine belief, and it is, but my belief, and it's equally genuine, is that if there's a peace agreement, and as I say, we know what it looks like, I grant you, and I agree, it's a gamble. It's a gamble. We're strong, and if it doesn't work, we'll have to handle it, and we can handle it. But it's a gamble, and I grant that. But if we don't have a peace agreement, and if we continue the occupation, we have a certainty, not a gamble, not a guess, not a hypothesis, we have a certainty of more violence, more rockets, more wars. And so my conclusion is a little different from, as I say, maybe conclusion of others.
Thank you. Okay, let's get a couple more questions from this side, and then we'll come back over to this side. So, Stephanie? We got 1, 2, 3.
So my name's Annie. So my question is, do you see the boycott, divest, sanctions movement as having any potential for ending the occupation or the violence?
Okay. Another one.
Hi, my name is Kim, and I wanted to know what you saw the role of AIPAC right now as far as helping to create peace.
Okay, sure. One more on this side, and then I promise I'll come back to this side.
My name is Marvin Sippel. What element of the Orthodox Jews play in this issue with their pushing for more settlements? They do not have to fight in the wars. They close their streets. Is there any effort to sort of color in some of the religious freedom there that contributes to this conflict?
Okay. You were at one of the earlier conversations, I remember, and asked a question as well. I'm going to take that one first. The Orthodox community is not one community. Those who don't serve, that's the ultra-Orthodox. So just so we get that. The settlers, the ideological settlers are Orthodox. What are called religious Zionism. Okay, let me just, I guess, what I should explain is, first of all, most Israelis are secular. It's only about 25-30% could be considered religious or religiously observant, although many more are traditional. Ultra-Orthodox are about 7%. We also don't have separation of religion and state. We have religious parties. We have ultra-Orthodox parties. We have religious parties. Over the years, some of the religious parties were dovish. We had an ultra-Orthodox, 2 ultra-Orthodox parties that were in fact dovish. But they're also very poor communities because usually the men, in most cases in the ultra-Orthodox, the men are studying in the yeshivas and they don't have a lot of money, and housing is a serious problem. And relatively recently, they started going to settlements. It's very recent. And when that happened, those ultra-Orthodox parties that had been dovish suddenly became hawkish. Basically, these parties don't have a political position. Generally, they go with the left or the right when the government is set up, depending on who will provide funding for the religious schools, who will give them the benefits that they want. So in the past, they went with the leftist government, they went with the rightist government. But when they started needing some settlements, that's my interpretation, they moved to the right. But I think they would still go with the left if the left would give them what they want in terms of their own school system and benefits. It's what's known as the religious Zionism, which is a much larger community of Orthodox, but not ultra-Orthodox. They serve. And they are the ones that have become more religious and more right-wing over the years. They are the core of the settler movement. God gave us this land, it's ours, and they're settling it. And they have been, not only do they go to the army, they've been staying in the army and forming part of the officer corps, and so now they're even influencing the army in a right-wing direction, which had not been the case before. Very, very complicated. But in any case, if you had to just sort of make one statement, I think it would be safe to say that the religious community is not helping the situation. Particularly the core of the settlers and the support for the settler movement. And today, this community has a good deal of political power. And they're very extreme. I mean, our deputy foreign minister we don't have a foreign minister, so our deputy foreign minister is a settler woman, young, very bright woman, extremely right-wing, And actually, Netanyahu in today's paper had to tell her to shut up because she's been saying things that are so extreme, but made it very clear this is God-given land and we're going to stay. I won't mention some of the others. So it's very unfortunate because it's a change in that community. They didn't used to all be that way. But because they have political power, not in numbers, but so much as in being able to tip the scales, it's serious. Okay. AIPAC and BDS. Can I go home?
No.
Okay. I'm not a fan of AIPAC. And I'm really very sorry about it because I think the people associated with AIPAC, this is the American-Israel, but anyway, it's basically the Israeli lobby. And I'm sorry about their positions because I feel that these are people who support Israel and love Israel and spend a good deal of their time and money in what they think is serving Israel. And I think that's terrific because they could just as easily spend their time and money doing something else. They don't have to care about us. But their position has been that whatever the Israeli government is doing, decides, or the Israeli electorate has decided, that's what we support. And that's probably good for a lobby. But I have two criticisms. One is that that's all well and good, except when Yitzhak Rabin was in power in the Oslo Accords, that wasn't their policy. Because they're human beings, they're people, and they had certain opinions of their own. Some of them were encouraged by Israeli politicians, but whatever the reasons, they didn't support the Oslo Accords, and they did not support Yitzhak Rabin. And that's documented. I have them listed in a book that I've been writing as spoilers. And they were. They weren't responsible for any of the failures or the assassination, but the role they played was not positive. So that's one criticism I have of AIPAC. So don't tell me you support any old government of Israel. The other is that I don't consider that their position a pro-Israel position. I'm sorry if there are AIPAC supporters here. I think a pro-Israel position is to be in favor of peace. And it's not a slogan. It is the slogan of J Street. To be pro-peace is to be pro-Israel. But I don't think to be pro-Israel, in quotes, means that you have to be anti-Palestinian. And I don't think to be pro-Palestinian you have to be anti-Israel. I think if you're interested and want to help us resolve the conflict, you would be pro-peace and not support those either side who are against it or are working against it. That brings me to BDS. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I have a couple problems with BDS. One is the rhetoric. Particularly in Europe, possibly less so in the United States, the BDS campaign is accompanied by a great deal of really genuinely anti-Israel rhetoric, that we really have no right to exist, total illegitimacy of the state, and obviously I can't support that. Not only can I not support it, I think it's very destructive, and I'll get back to that. The second problem I have with BDS is that I'm afraid it'll have, all over genuine BDS, would have the reverse or the opposite effect of what was desired, that it would lead to a rally around the flagpole reaction in Israel, sort of solidarity with the government, as the government, making very easy for the government to say, you see, they're all against us, they hate us, they don't, by the way, the government says that, that it's a delegitimizing campaign, they're against our very right to exist as a state. And so I'm afraid that it would have that effect. The other thing that bothers me about it is that it's so polarizing. And that's something I've only come to realize when I've been on this visit to the United States. And I've been learning what happens on the campuses. And it's polarizing. So you get this tremendous position against Israel, total blockade, sanctions, the works. And then you get your response, your right-wing Jewish students with this really rough stuff, and you're polarized. Where the message that I think has to be out there is the message of Combatants for Peace, that it's cooperation and working together to end the occupation. And that, by the way, is the position of the PLO. And many Palestinians are not happy that the leadership of the PLO has not come out formally in favor of BDS, because the position of the leadership of the PLO is a two-state solution. It's working with Israelis, not boycotting. It's working with Israelis and not boycotting. Particularly the academic boycott is destructive. That isn't to say that I believe that sanctions won't help. I think selective sanctions would help. And when I say selective sanctions, I mean sanctions against the settlement projects. Why support the settlements? Why support that whole endeavor, which is designed to obstruct any chance of peace? I think if individual business people begin to feel the pinch, and we've had signs of this already, that might help. I think pressure, and I mentioned political pressure, I think political pressure would help, and I could, that's not a popular thing to say, but maybe we need that. We've had political pressure in the past from the United States to make peace, with Egypt, for example, and it worked. So I'm not saying no pressure, and I'm also not saying no sanctions, but I think it has to be very selective and within a framework of basically two-state solution, and not this overpowering, that's it, anything Israel does is wrong. So the bottom line for me is that I don't think BDS is helpful. It certainly isn't helpful. Practically the only part of it working is the academic boycott. And that is really not helpful, because that's just hurting the peace camp. I mean, that's really senseless. But I understand where it comes from, but it has much greater support outside than it does inside.
Okay, should we get in a few more questions? So we're going to let's have 1, 2, 3. Back here. And I know we've got a couple over here as well. Yeah. We've only got 15 minutes. We'll have to have shorter questions and shorter answers to get a few more.
Donna Hutchell, educator. And one question is, which group do you think has been most effective here in helping the peace movement in Israel? And the other one is, it seems that when people are most concerned with the economy, somehow linking inside, you've got to link the cost of the war with the rise of the cost of living and hit the people in the wallet so that they can change, because I think it's coming from above, ultimately. You can't do it until
My name is Marissa, and mine is somewhat related. I'd like to know, are there economic incentives for continued conflict, and if so, for who?
Okay, and then I did say there, and then I'll come back here, and over here too. Okay.
I'm Ray Register. I worked with the Baptist Convention in Israel from 1965 to 2002. My daughter married there, and we have in-laws in Ra'anana, Ramat Gan, and all over.
All right.
Centered at Baptist Village next to you. My question is how much of the situation going on in the Middle East with Daesh and ISIS and the Muslim belief that Israel, and particularly Al-Quds or Jerusalem, is Waqf. It's Islamic property that's been taken. How much does this impact what's going on right now, particularly the violence?
Thank you. Okay, do you want to take another couple questions, or are you going to have quick answers so we can get in one or two?
Well, let's take one more.
Okay, one more from this side, and then I'll come back here. So we just took 3 there again.
My name is Kathleen Hewart, and I was a writer at the Women PeaceMaker program. I want to address U.S. military assistance to Israel. And I'll make it short because there are people who say that even Israelis are against the amount of arms that the U.S. supports by money given to Israel.
Thank you. Okay, quick answers, and then hopefully we'll be able to get back to some more here as well.
Okay. It's pretty easy to answer the question about the costs of the occupation and war and defense and so forth. By the way, our economy is in very good shape. The issue of the cost of living, it was a middle-class rebellion, so to speak. And we could not introduce that issue. We wanted to introduce the settlements. Tremendous sums of money go to the settlements, to protecting them, to building them, education, the whole works. The privileges, the benefits that they get. And they wouldn't let us do it. They didn't want any speeches like that at all because they didn't want any division, left or right. So we couldn't make we make the argument, but no. The leadership of the people who were, making the speeches, the young people, it was a young people's movement.
In the protests when they were protesting
over
the cost of living. So it was the protesters
We try to
themselves.
make that connection, but it's not easy. We've tried. There are many different things. It's the moral argument, the economic argument, the security argument. There are many sides to this, many reasons that we need to end the occupation. A Zionist argument, excuse me, if we want to be a state for the Jews, the Jewish majority. I mean, basically, the reason Rabin was interested in ending the occupation, and a number of leaders since then on the right, is a demographic issue, is that if we continue to hold on to the occupied territories, Jews will be outnumbered by Palestinians in not too many years from now. And then what do we have? We have apartheid, where we give them full rights. We give them full rights. We're a minority in our own country. So there are many reasons for wanting to end the occupation. And the one I've just mentioned has been the crucial reason that leaders, including right-wing leaders, have come to the conclusion that we've got to end the occupation, not necessarily the moral argument or others. So, as a group doing the U.S., it's hard to say, we have friendship groups, setting one up for the combatants. We have friendship groups for our human rights associations and for a lot of the peace movements. So I can't say which one is the best. I think J Street is extremely important, and I was delighted when they're trying to give a voice to what I think may actually be the majority of American Jews. So if I had to pick one, which is a totally American group, it would be J Street. As I say, though, there are many, many others that are doing wonderful things like this Hands for Peace. There are many that are doing wonderful things, and Seeds of Peace is fabulous. Economic incentives for the conflict, I think there may be people making money from the conflict, people building the settlements, do the actual buildings, and maybe the arms industries. There's some Palestinians who make money out of the conflict, but I don't think that that's what's going on. I don't think that's what's keeping this conflict going. But it could be that if some people find that their income is going down, that investments are going down. And by the way, Israeli exports are going down. There's only a very gradual move, but I heard a very important ex-government economist recently say that we can expect exports to decline. And that can hurt. And if that begins to hurt, maybe that element will make a difference. Jerusalem and Islam. Well, Jerusalem, of course, is a hot potato, and that's exactly what triggered this set of violence and many other sets of violence in the past. But it's a symbol more than anything else. It's a symbol for the Palestinians, and it's a symbol for us, for the Jews. But the truth is, I mean, and if related to Islamic extremism, one of the motives that Rabin had for trying to reach an agreement, the major motive was, as I said, demographic. Another one was the rise of Islamism. He was very concerned about what happens to Israel. He knew that Iran was building a bomb. In 1989 already, we had intelligence on that. And that was one of the things, one part of his motivation was to get this conflict off the agenda as Islamism was growing, so that we wouldn't be a target anymore. It's hard to know what the one thing that has happened with the rise of Islamism, with Daesh and so forth, is that we do have a mutuality of interest with many of the Arab states now. But what's blocking cooperation is, of course, the conflict with the Palestinians. So it adds an incentive. And do you know that our security people, the army, the Mossad, and even the Shin Bet, believe that we need a conflict, particularly in these circumstances, and believe that it's an opportunity because the Arab states want to cooperate. It's very interesting. Our politicians do not necessarily reflect the views, or I'll put it differently, our security people are not all that bad. They're not as bad as the politicians. They really aren't. U.S. military assistance. Look, we could not have survived the last war last summer without American military assistance. We ran out of anti-missile missiles. Who asked the question? Yeah, we ran out of anti-missile missiles, the Iron Dome missiles. And if the Americans hadn't resupplied us, I hate to say what kind of casualties we would have had. Not as much as the Palestinians had from our bombing, but we are absolutely dependent upon American military aid, absolutely dependent. In the Yom Kippur War, they were flying in not only ammunition, but uniforms. We're absolutely dependent. Now, can that be used? It was used in trying to get agreement with Egypt. Some of the arms deals were frozen. It's tricky. And Americans have other ways of bringing pressure without endangering us that much. But we are totally dependent upon military assistance, which we pay for. We pay back these debts and so forth. But by the way, a very large part of our budget is to repay, because you have to repay by buying American arms. It's not just aid that we get. So yeah, we're dependent, and as somebody who's under those rockets when they're falling, I don't want to see the Americans stop providing us with anti-missile missiles. But there are ways to bring pressure without necessarily doing that.
So maybe a couple questions. Emily, and I did say come here and then there. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Emily. I was just wondering, I know in the United States there's a fear among people about terrorism, and it's even, we don't have terrorism every day like you guys do, but there is a fear, and I was just wondering what is the role that fear plays, either among the youth or just among the population, or on the economy or anything like that?
Fear is the factor. The factor. And the government manipulates it, plays on it. This is one of the reasons that, as much as I hate to be the one to say it, what we needed in order to win the last election was to have an ex-military person as head of the Labour Party and not this sweet, lovely civil rights guy. Fear is, we're born with it. It's generations, it's millennia of it's there. And when you know how to manipulate it, and that's what happened in the last elections. And we know that. Now, there are other reasons that we lost the elections, and there are other things that have to be done or should be done to get to different parts of the public and try to persuade them, but it's mainly fear. The right-wing government has been reelected and reelected because people believe that peace isn't possible, and therefore, if we're going to have to live by the sword, we've got to be sure to have a strong, steadfast government. It's all that same thing.
Okay. Here?
Perhaps. Bernie from J Street. And my question is, what percentage of the Israeli population actually supports a two-state solution?
Oh, the majority. Oh, for sure. 60, 70%, it depends. It goes ups and down. No.
Yeah, because we have been reading that among the general population in Israel that it has been a decreasing percentage.
No, it might be in the sense that it was 70%. It may be down to 55 or 60%. I have the recent polls, but it's still over 50%. That doesn't worry me. Two-state solution. The problem isn't the Israeli public. I don't think it's even the Palestinian public. Although the Palestinian public, the poll that Khalil Shikaki did that for the first time in September, support for two-state solution was 48% instead of above 50%. First time that's happened in years and years. But it isn't the publics that worry me. Now, the public's important because we have to have elections, and we have to somehow in the elections make people confident enough that peace is worth trying for. But the issue isn't that people don't support two states. The issue is that they don't believe it's possible.
Can we get one question in very, very quickly in the middle? I know I've been doing a lot of periphery. The last one.
Hi, my name is Nasser Arabshahi. I go to school here. I'm a political science major. I just had one question. I know on both sides it's originally a political issue, but both sides put religion and got involved, such as in Jerusalem, over which land is theirs. But I know both sides say they want peace, but for example, I know there's terrorist attacks on both sides, such as Hamas and Hezbollah doing attacks. Some of them are freedom fighters, some are terrorist attacks, but when Israel wants to create peace by attacking brutally, because they say I read online, there's a ratio, for every 600 Palestinians dead, there's one Israeli. So in my eyes, how's that it's not really a terrorism on the Palestinian side. So I'm saying if both sides just stop, on both sides, for example, if Israeli Palestinians attack, you don't brutally kill them and a lot of civilians, children, schools getting bombed when they think it's Hezbollah militants in there. So I just think if they stop that, will be a great improvement without terrorist attacks on both sides.
The only thing I would disagree with in what you said is a 600 to 1. It's more like 3 to 1, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's there's no question about it. And I would go along with what we're doing is no less terrorism than what they're doing. You can call it, we feel that the justifications we're defending ourselves, but we're defending ourselves in two ways. I mean, sort of overkill in many instances. And the other is maintaining the occupation. I mean, it really boils down to that. And as I said before, I'm not saying that we end the occupation, we have a peace agreement, and everything is going to be beautiful. But you cannot expect Palestinians to live under occupation and not try to resist. Now, I don't like terrorism. I'm not defending it. I mean, one of my kids was a victim, thank goodness not badly, in Jerusalem, because we're Jerusalemites. I recently moved to Ra'anana. I'm not justifying it, but it is to be expected. And if you drop bombs from the air, 1-ton bombs, on houses where maybe there is a terrorist leader in Gaza, I agree entirely. That's state terrorism. That's why this movement, no, I don't think this government wants peace. I do think the people do, the public does, and I think that the public also feels that that basically we're defending ourselves. And when rockets are falling, you want to defend yourself. But there's an alternative, and that's what we have to get across. There is another way, and I didn't create that slogan. I came to this movement because of that slogan. And that's what we have to do, is persuade people that there is another way. Yes, we're under fire, and they're under more fire. And that's no answer. That's no answer. There is no military answer to this conflict.
Thank you.